tell me that this was the original?
That was the original, 1984.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Valentina Cagnola. I'm a partner of Equipe International, the company that conceived and launched Exans together with Silvio Levi in 2009. I just wanted to take a moment to say that Michael Edwards and the Fragrance of the World team have always been supporting Exans since the first edition, when we had only 80 or 100 brands and not 400 as today. And so today I want to thank Michael, really, for believing in us from day one and for still being by our side. So thank you so much, Michael, really. And a heartfelt thank also to Silvio Levi, to Ascensional Study Center and Karen Marin for organizing this event. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So welcome to Michael, that is my grandfather, because there is a wonderful relationship, and since the beginning, he trusts in us, when no one trusted us at the beginning, probably. And I think that Michael is a connecting man, because thanks to the works of Michael, everyone learned to know better the fragrances, especially the system he invented to catalogize the fragrances, the database, a lot of fragrance finders in the world are based on Michael Edwards' work, for example. And so I think that we have to tribute to Michael a thank you, enormous thank you, because I connected all the part of the world. So he's connecting the niche to the masstige, to everything, but masterpieces are everywhere, not only in the niches, for sure. And so I think that Michael made also wonderful books. I invite all of you to read the books of Michael. And I think that what he established up to now is a magic, very important. So thank you so much. Thank you to Karen, obviously, and myself and Maurizio. Thanks, together with Valentina, once again. A great, great thank you to be there. It's a wonderful gift. Thank you. Bye.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Karen Marin. I'm the Director of Content and Consultant with Exceptional. And it's really a pleasure to be here today to speak with Michael. Over my career, I think I've worked with Michael it's been over 20 years in one way or another. And he's been a mentor, a friend, almost family to me. And it's an emotional moment for me. But so Michael, here we are. And, it was just about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, that we had a great conversation where you were talking about fragrance over the decades and your vision of how things evolved and where you think it's going to go. So could you share that with the audience?
Oh, I can imagine all of you. Thank you again for having me here. It's a pleasure to see you once more. And I know when you hear that, you imagine that I'm going to get up there and probably for the next hour and a half, I'm going to give you not a short version of perfume history. I'm not. I'm going to give you a capsule as quickly as I possibly can. Most people assume that real perfume is French perfume, but it isn't. The first eau de cologne was created in Cologne in 1709. Can you hear that quite clearly?
It's better? Is it better? Maybe a little bit.
How would that be?
There we go.
Is that a better one? I apologize. So I'm not going to give you a cook's tour of perfume. I'm going to give you a capsule tour. And I said that most people assume that real perfume is French perfume. But in fact, it was created for the first time in Cologne in Germany in 1709. Jean-Marie Farina, the first eau de cologne, and still existent to this day. In the 1700s, the center of perfume moved to London. Think of Floris, think of Atkinson, think of Yardley. And it wasn't until the mid-1800s that Paris became the center of fashion and fragrance at that stage. The last part of the 19th century was a frenzied period of discovery, new synthetic materials. And 4 perfumers came to dominate perfumery at that time, all out of Paris. There was, for example, Paul Parquet, who in 1862, then 1864, invented the first fragrance that used a synthetic note in it. It was followed by Aimé Guerlain in 1889. The same year, the Eiffel Tower went up with Jicky. Jicky was not just a perfume. Back at that time, the perfumers were trying to imitate nature, the scent of rose, the scent of lily of the valley. Aimé Guerlain didn't. He wanted to create a feeling and emotion. And today we regard Jicky as probably the first artistic creation coming into perfume. But it was the great Francois Coty that transformed the world. He knew nothing about fragrance, but he talked himself into a training job at de Cherise in Grasse. It was pure genius. He created 3 of today's fragrance families: L'Origan, 1905, Floral Oriental, Floral Amber. Then came Chypre de Coty, 1917. It gave its name to the whole area of Chypre perfumes. And then, 4 years before Shalimar, came Emeraude. I know we often forget Emeraude, but it in fact was the prototype of ambery fragrances. And last of all was Jacques Guerlain. In many ways, Jacques Guerlain took what Coty had done and improved on it. He transformed it into such great fragrances as Mitsuku, Le Bleu, Shalimar. And those were the quartet of perfumers that really started French perfume and real perfume back then. The 1920s, of course, were the era of designers, Coco Chanel, Patou, Worth, all of those ones there. The 1930s, 1940s, luxury and depression there. But remember, if you look back to those great days, essentially they were a version of what niche is today. We're talking about perfumes created for customers who had enormous taste and sensitivity, were looking for something different. We're talking about perfumes that were extremely expensive, difficult to find, just as niche. It was a whole different world. It started to change in the 50s, but for me, the key decade was the 1970s. 2 blockbusters happened that changed our whole world. Number 1 was Charlie by Revson. Charles Revson and Revlon in 1973. I know you look at me with wonder and think, Charlie, you've got to be kidding. No way. Charlie changed the world at that time. In America, for example, women would not buy perfume for themselves. I didn't say did not, would not buy perfume for themselves because they expected to be given it as a gift by the men in their life. It was an age where most women worked. They didn't have the money, in most cases, to go and buy perfume for themselves. But the 70s changed it, and Charles Revson of Revlon picked it up. He knew that this was a generation of women right around the world, in fact, who were moving from homemakers to the office. For the first time, they had money. And Charlie said, don't wait to be given. Buy it for yourself. And they did, and by the end of the 70s, women were spending more money on perfume than men were spending on giving it to them. The second blockbuster, guess what? Opium, 1977. Opium was a blockbuster like you've never believed. It was the equivalent in perfume of of Jaws in the movies. It changed our world. Jaws was the first movie that went into 1,000 movie theaters. Overnight, suddenly the summer season came about here. Opium, it was perfect. It was a perfect synergy of name, of scent, of pricing, of advertising. It was incredible. And it changed forever the world of fragrance. In the 1980s, inevitably, it all came to boost. 1980s were a decade of power and money. Think, for example, of the contrast between Beautiful and Obsession, 1985, or Passion, for example, and Poison from Dior there. Think of the impact of Giorgio had on the world. It was loud, it cost a lot of money, but the 70s, the 80s were also the age in which the brands start to spend money like there were no tomorrow. Obsession, for example, Calvin Klein backed the launch with over $20 million and 20 million scent strip samplers. Then came Poison, and over an 18-month period, Dior backed that fragrance, over $40 million. It got such a point that when Samsara came along, Guerlain spent the house money. They spent so much that they had to sell the house at the end of the day. The 90s were totally different. Perhaps inevitably what goes up changes or goes down. And so instead of power and money, we start to see minimalism and sharing with CK1, if you remember. But in America in particular, in Europe, the 90s were great. You had such fragrances as Angel, for example, L'Eau d'Issey. But in America, it wasn't so happy. The problem was, number one, there was the Gulf War in 1991, and that decimated duty-free around the world. And many of these great brands were making about 30% of their sales from duty-free, so down it went. The second thing is the Bath & Body Works, a totally different style of perfume, light, easy to wear. It launched at the start of the 1990s. By 1997, Bath & Body Works had accumulated almost $1 billion worth of sales. They had killed the impact of many of the power brands of the 1970s, 80s. But by that time, those brands were in the hands of the multinationals. And if you're a marketing manager for a multinational, whether you like it or not, whether it's a Gulf War or not, whether there's Bath & Body Works nipping at your heel, you'd better make your budget. So what do? Discounting. And so we start to see discounting flaring up all over the place. Great brands suddenly available at a price. The great department stores in America had only one answer. They couldn't afford to keep them. So one by one, they dropped them and discontinued them. But if you're a great department store like Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman, Neiman Marcus, what do you replace them by? And that was where, for the first time, they looked to the niche. The niche had started in 1978. Jean-François Laporte, for example, for L'Artisan Parfumeur. Then came Monique Goutal in 1981 there. Then came Etro down the track, Matra Parfumerie Gantier. Tiny little brands. If you worked for Vogue, you probably knew about them. If you worked for a fragrance house, funny enough, you ignored them. And so they were these little brands on the horizon that nobody knew about. But suddenly the American department stores took a look at them and said, we like you. They were hesitant. They brought them in not expecting them to succeed. But to their delight, they found there was a generation of men and women who'd become interested in fragrance in the 1960s, loved it in the 70s. Suddenly in the 80s, this was great. And now in the 90s, they were looking for something different. And in many ways, it was that gave niche perfume in the 1990s and the noughties as we came into the new century a showcase. Without that happening, without Bath & Body Works, without the war that took place, my personal feeling is niche would have struggled. Suddenly in America, they had a showcase. Then, of course, 2005, 2006, came social media. Now, remember, if you would, that the great department stores also had the great brands as their customers. So can you imagine somebody from Bergdorf saying to Chanel, we need a niche from you? Now you can see why in 2004 we saw a whole explosion of niche fragrances from the major brands. Les Exclusives de Chanel, for example. Hermès, Dior Privé, all of them. They were developed in a direct response to the fact that these great American department stores needed new brands. And so we have this enormous thing coming along. Now, when I look back at the figures, in the first part of the century, we saw about 1,000 niche fragrances coming up. It wasn't a big market. But in the next 10 years, niche exploded. Over 11,000 niche fragrances we identified between 2010 to 2019. And between 2020 to 2026 now, guess how many niche fragrances we've identified? 10,000 plus. If it keeps on this way, by the end of the decade, we'll have seen close to 28, 30,000 new fragrances coming down the track. It's a huge explosion on that. So where is all this leading? One word: change. One thing that intrigued me is that in the 1910s, we start to see a whole lot of fragrances coming out from the perfumers, created by perfumers, under the mark of the perfumers. At the same time, COVID gave us a whole new audience, especially the young audience. They've become wrapped up in perfumery. And one of the predictions I have is that we're going to see a resurgence of the art of perfume. Silvio says artistic perfume. I think people taking perfume very seriously as an artistic feeling behind it there. That's one prediction. I think the second thing is that personalization will become the norm. We saw what happened to Joe Malone, mix this, mix that one, and everybody looked sideways. I think that's going to be the norm. I was talking to the daughter of a colleague the other day, and I said, "What do you wear?" She said, "I wear the new Isimiaki Le Sel." But she said, "It's not my favorite perfume. I just like it for this touch of freshness. What I do is I mix it with two others of the perfumes." This idea of creating your own fragrance, I think, is going to dominate us over the next 10 years. I think AI is going to make it even easier because it's going to accelerate the ease of coming up with new formulations. And so I anticipate a lot more fragrances. But the one area that nobody has spoken to me about that fascinates me is what's happening at the big end of the town. We're here today to meet on niche. But have you kept track of what's happening to the giants? For example, the competition between Chanel and Dior. Louis Vuitton is desperate to get that happening because their share price has stumped with the worldwide backlash against pricing and luxury, especially in China. As you know, their share price has gone down by by about a third. Likewise, Estee Lauder, share price by 75% down. Unwisely, they tried to link up to Puig. The share market overnight dropped the price of Lauder by 13%, increased the price of Puig by 8%. In other words, don't do it. So they've walked away from that. What about Kering putting all their brands in future in L'Oreal? That means Creed, for which they paid $3.4 billion. That means Gucci. What's going to happen to Coty? Strangely, not a single of the business journalists who've reached to me for the last month have mentioned any of that. It's as though we're all invisible. The fight that is happening, that will continue to fight at the top end of the market, is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before. It has to be. Back at the turn of the century, perfume was not the big thing. Skincare was. COVID turned perfume into the giant killer. Now you have the greatest, biggest brands in the world, and they're fighting each other for retail. Will that hurt niche? Yes, inevitably. It's going to make niche more difficult to raise money, but on the other hand, if you've got a great idea, you'll probably get latched up very quickly by one of the great brands. Will it keep the gloss on niche? I suspect a lot of the gloss is going to go on to the major companies. The one thing we know is that when the new century started, perfume was interesting. Today it's fantastic. We have an audience like no other audience in history who loves us. Let's do right by them. I hope that answers that.
Oh my goodness, that's quite an answer. But you know, over all these decades, you've told me that there's one thing that really hasn't changed, and it's the search for what is the fragrance that I want to wear.
You're quite right.
And how do I find that?
You're quite right. I sat on the judging panel for the Fragrance Foundation UK Awards. This was the judging panel for the articles. And so I'd been on that, I think, about 30 years ago. And I compared what I was seeing with 30 years ago. Apart from the fact that 30 years ago, the journalists were writing about signature fragrances, there's hardly any change. 30 years ago, the key question was, how do I find a fragrance that I'd enjoy? I hate to tell you, today, influencer, do you know which fragrance I'm going to like that I'll enjoy? The basic question's not changed. The reality to me is that fragrance is the most difficult product to sell. Why? Because we have no common language. And all the brands use different words to describe their fragrances there. And so largely it's hunt around, search, listen to what somebody else says. I don't see why it should be so difficult. I don't see why people make it complicated. And you probably look at me with a quizzical look. But think of it this way. Perfume for me is like wine. In wine, you like red wines, you like white wines. Do you prefer red wines to white wines? Perhaps. Within white wines, if you like them, is there a preference? Do you like, for example, Pinot Grigio? Do you like a Sauvignon Blanc? It seems logical to know that in wines there's going to be a kind of wine that you might prefer. It doesn't mean to say you won't like others, but probably one that you'll say, yes, I like that in particular. What's the difference in fragrance? When I speak to people at the counters and I say, what are your favorite perfumes? And they give me 3 or 4 fragrances, almost invariably, 2 of them to 3 of them will belong to the same fragrance family. The reality is that in perfume, we each usually come up with a family that we particularly like. And so my idea back 50 years ago that came to reality in 1984 with my first guidebook is, why don't you just offer them some other fragrances from that family? Because you know what they like, and it's going to be so much easier to sell. There was a problem back then in the 80s, though. There was no guide. Firmenich had a marvelous guide called the Bouquet de la Parfumerie, but they stopped it in 1979. The great Harman and Reimer genealogies were marvelous, but for retail they weren't enough because they didn't list all the fragrances that you were going to find at a retail side. And so I made up my own guide. I'm not a genius, and life was different then. There were only 29 new fragrances in 1984, the year I brought out my new book. And so it wasn't too difficult to put a new guide together. In fact, this was the original guide, believe it or not. As you can see, when you look at the page, you'll see 4 columns: fresh, crisp, classical, and rich. It was a way of describing the depth of the fragrances, from Diorissimo, the freshest one, down to Joy, the classic one, down to, for example, Fracas, the rich one with tuberose. I'm bad at singing, but I'm getting better at that kind of one. And that was what the key difference between the classifications that the perfumers were making. I changed some of the names, sure. Have you ever tried to sell an aldehyde at a counter? Don't. And so I changed it to soft floral, because at the end of the day, they all come down as soft and powdery there. Likewise, the perfumers called a family, an Oriental family, semi-Oriental. I was at Nordstrom in America one day, and I was at a counter, and I happened to hear a consultant talking about this marvelous new semi-Oriental fragrance that Nordstrom had. And the customer looked up with a puzzled expression and said, "Does that mean I'll only get half of what I paid for?" Next day, I changed the classification to soft Oriental. These are the kind of things, like I brought in, for example, woody amber. Why? Because in 1986, Givenchy came out with Isatis. Ah, said Givenchy, it's an Oriental. No, said the perfumers, set in sheep. I have to keep peace with both. And the next year, Passion came out from Elizabeth Taylor. Ah, said Elizabeth Taylor, it's an Oriental. No, said perfumers, it's a sheep. So because I have to keep peace with both the perfumers and the brands, I proposed a woody amber family. And everybody's accepted that, and so that's the norm. But essentially, almost all of my work has come from retail, finding ways to make it easier for people to find new perfumes to enjoy. And that's why things haven't changed.
This is incredible that this was the original. Like, never seen this. And so this is from '84. And then the books.
This is the last book we did.
That's the last
You can see
book.
what happened. We would have to bring a horse and carriage to bring it to you.
But now the database has over 60,000
Yes, it does.
fragrances.
Yes, it does.
And so you've gone digital. You went digital in
We went
2004?
digital. No, really, even before this. I went digital for the first time 1996. One of my colleagues, Pankaj Patel, who develops all my database, he proposed a CD-ROM because his wife had been using my guide and he'd suggested a fragrance for her and she liked it. And he had the idea, why don't we turn this book into a CD-ROM? And we did, and we proposed for House of Fraser in London. And it was beautiful. They launched it there in the fragrance department, and there was the computer, and around it were little boxes with flowers and hard grasses. It was great, great launch there. It lasted 10 days. Nobody could remember how to switch the computer on or off. This was pre-digital days. But then in 1999, we got caught up in the dot-com revolution. We got a request from beauty.com. That was the first of the giant online beauty shops, like a Sephora, for example. And they said, can you do a fragrance finder? And I did. And that was the first online fragrance finder. Today, we've seen off about 30 other fragrance finders. We create fragrance finders right around the world. I mean, the essence of my business, we make no charge for checking fragrances, for classifying, for listing them. It's totally free of charge, big or small. But we use the data to, on really hyped up versions like CD-ROMs, like fragrance finders for stores like Sephora, for Wiki Parfum and things like that. We remain impartial, independent in order to do that. But that's how we work. And so 2004, I brought in the database to provide me with all the material I needed for the online work.
I mean, I remember...
Today, it's the baby.
Yeah, I remember working with you when I was a buyer at Sephora back around that time.
That's where we met, at Sephora,
and
when you were a fragrance buyer.
But we did a paper version.
Exactly.
And then eventually it went digital.
That's right.
And now you have a new tool coming out.
Oh, I do indeed. Have you got it?
I have it on the screen.
Oh, please do.
I have it on the screen.
So what am I looking at?
Oh, I think you can see it here.
Welcome to the Fragrance of the World app. It's about to hit. We were asked by a client to say, look, we love your fragrance finders. We love the online stuff. But what we need is a little thing that we can use in store. And so what we have here, you'll see that you'll be able to match your fragrance.
You can see it on the screen.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sure.
You feed into the database your inventory of fragrances. Somebody is looking for a particular fragrance, you ask them what it is, you type in the name of that, and it'll immediately recommend 3 to 4 other fragrances that you carry that are probably the closest matches to that customer. A very easy, immediate fragrance finder. You'll see Explore the Families. Here you'll be able to go family by family, and 3 fragrances will pop up that are from the fragrance stock that you have. This is very much a retail tool. I'm sure it'll have other tools, but it's very much a retail tool. We developed it initially for niche stores around the world. Agence de Parfum, for example, in Australia was our test market for over 18 months on this one. But in future, I suspect it's going to be more in stores like Sephora and the more prestige tier of stores like Boots, for example, in the United Kingdom. Then you can search by notes. If somebody is looking for a fragrance of tuberose, great, pop that in and you'll get the ones that you stock. Browse by mood is going to fascinate you there. Search by brand. It'll immediately show all the brands you stock with all the fragrances and all the information about them there. And about us, where we're going, how we've developed this work. It's not going to be expensive. We suggest that you have a portfolio. Minimum will be 10 smartphones. And for any retailer that has less than 100, it's going to be for each one $49 a month. On the other hand, if you go up to less than 300, it's going to reduce to 45. Go over 300, like some of the big retailers would want to do, and it'll come down to 39. And that's per month. So it's a very reasonable fee to have everything in your business at our fingertips.
Well, it's a great tool for
I think it will be.
to
It's been a
assist in
fascinating
sales.
tool to develop. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, aside from the tools that you have, I know that you've written several books, which they are on sale here at the bookshop. I saw
Thank
them.
you. My
Yes, I saw them. But in those books, you talked about many different fragrances, French, American, and such. Are there any that have like a special meaning to you? Like, can you mention one or two fragrances that maybe have a special meaning to you? Maybe from the moment they launched or from conversation you had with a perfumer? You talked about opium. I mean, yeah.
Two in particular. Youth Dew, 1953, and Diorissimo, 1956. Why Youth Dew? Youth Dew transformed American perfumery. American women wouldn't buy perfume, as I said. And Estee Lauder said that's the problem with perfume, because it's a gift. Her solution was simple. She created a perfume that was also a bath oil. In 1950, she'd introduced a range of expensive skincare under the name Estoderm. In 1953, she added Estoderm Youth Dew as a bath oil. She worked with Josephine Catapano, the IFF perfumer. Josephine's dead now, but she was one of the first people I interviewed in the 1990s when I was starting research on my book, American Legends. Lovely person. She worked closely with Mrs. Lauder. Mrs. Lauder was into skin care. That was her genius. That was what she was really interested in. And so she approached Youth Dew almost as a skincare item and attached it to a skincare range. But right from the start, she was determined there would also be a perfume, and she kept on pushing. More, make it stronger. It got to a point that, in fact, it could not be dissolved in the regular bath oil formulations. It could only be dissolved in a product that did not dissolve in water, isopropyl mercury. And so when you popped a little bit of Youth Dew in your bath, it was on the surface of the bath, marvelous smell. As you got out of your bath, like a silken bathing, you had a body stocking on you. There was a signature that night, a trail the day after, and even on the third day, a hint. Can you imagine the impact in a world of French pussycats of something like that American tigress? It was extraordinary. She didn't immediately develop fragrance. She took her time. But then in 1968, she was ready. She launched Estee, 1968. Perfumers regard as the first American masterpiece. Certainly it was the first American fragrance that made the French perfumers sit up and take notice. And then she went on the gallop. 1969 was Azuré, 1972 Alliage, the sports fragrance. 1973, if I recall, Private Collection. 1984 came white linen. In the space of just 10 years, Mrs. Lauder had transformed American perfumery from plonk to genius on that. And so that's why I was so fascinated in learning about it, writing about it, and why I include it. My other one would be Diorissimo. Edmund Rudnitzer was the greatest perfumer of the mid-20th century. He became famous in 1944 for his creation of Femme by Rochas. It was the only perfume he had with the materials available at that time. But it was Marcel Rochas who encouraged him then to set up his own laboratory, and he did. He set it up at Cabris outside of Grasse. He made relatively few perfumes in his life, but a number of masterpieces that changed perfumery. Think of Eau Sauvage. After 200 years of eau de cologne, lovely, light, fresh fragrances had disappeared, Eau Sauvage came out with a fragrance just as fresh, but it lasted. No let up on the tenacity. He had transformed 200 years of eau de cologne. He was the first to come up with a fruity floral. Diorella, 1972. In America, Lauren was based on it, and suddenly today, we have to thank Diorella for all the fruity florals around the world. But it was Diorissimo that, for me, was the special one. Monsieur Rudnitzer had started questioning where perfume was going as early as 1950. Because after the war, there was an explosion of new chemical materials available to the perfumers. Most of them were strong and potent, and the perfumers found it difficult to use them. And so they started to add vanilla and sugary and fruity notes to try to disguise them, soften or balance them there. Rudnitzer once said that to him perfumery was becoming like an art from the kitchen rather than an olfactory art. And he said it had to stop. He set out from 1950 to try to come to the essence of what a perfume was. Nothing to do with fruity notes or sugary notes or the kitchen or anything, but the essential essence. He was working on a Lily of the Valley fragrance. He had a patch of Lily of the Valley, and he told me that every year he would smell it and look at it and smell it while it lasted. And by 1955, he had a perfume that was ready enough to show Christian Dior. And I showed it to him at his house close by, La Posa. And he said, Monsieur Dior's only comment was, that will be my next perfume. The mistake is to think of Diorissimo as a single floral. It's not. Last thing that Rudnitzer was interested in was coming up with a fragrance was just a single floral. He was looking for a stylized floral, and so within it you will find jasmine. He was also working on a hyacinth note at that time, he told me, and there's a touch of that. It's a totally different transformation, probably the purest fragrance that I've ever smelt in my life. Nothing to do with anything from the kitchen or anything else. Just the pure essence of what spring would be like in white flowers. And that's why I would choose Diorissimo for that.
Diorissimo.
Thank you for the chance to relive memories.
Well, we were going to talk about Edmund Rudnitzer, but also I wanted to talk about Guy Robert, because you said he was your mentor.
He was my mentor. Do you know much about Guy Robert? No? Okay.
Why not?
Guy's together with Edmund Rudnitzer, one of the great perfumers of the mid-century. He came from a family of perfumers. Joseph Robert, his grandfather, was the creator, the founder of the process by which steam extraction was created in Grasse in 1898. It was Joseph Robert who trained François Coty, for example, when he went there to be trained. It was his son, Henri Robert, who was the great perfumer for Coty with Muguet de Bois, the masterpiece of Coty fragrances. At the same time, he then joined Chanel and he created Cristal, Chanel 19, that one. Guy himself was the creator of Madame Rochas Calèche by Hermès, Gucci #1, and some of the later Gucci fragrances. Dior Essence, Christian Dior, and probably the greatest fragrance of all that he did, Amouage, Gold, both the men and the women's there. I, by chance, got to meet him by accident when he was about to retire from IFF. He was European head of IFF at that stage, and he turned just about 65. And I happened to meet him at a conference, and I had a question on my mind, because in classifying my books, I would go to the perfumers, and I would ask for their classification and double-check my classification with them. And I was fascinated about their work, and I didn't expect them to tell me much, because back then, in the 1980s, 1990s, perfumers were invisible. They never smoked. But to my surprise, they were willing to do, and that was what encouraged me to develop Perfume Legends and then American Legends. But what fascinated me was that of these great iconic fragrances, there were so many contradictory stories. And so I asked Guy, what's the true story? And to my surprise, he answered me. He invited me for coffee, and what turned into a coffee was a dialogue. Maybe it was because he was about to retire. He was in his 60s. And here was me. I was in my mid-40s, something like that. And all I wanted to know was learn more. Give me a chance, and I would just listen rapt to what he spoke about that. He then guided me on the Perfume Legends side. He would invite me down to his house in Provence, and I'd stay a week, sometimes 2, once 3. I must have been a real rat, because all I could do was to ask him more questions. He became my mentor, a very close friend, and the last 12 years, he was my consultant for all my work. Only once does one come across a guy, quite with his knowledge, his genius. I hope he's up there looking down and saying, pull yourself together. That was Guy, my mentor, my friend, Marvel.
Oh, Michael. Well, Michael, you're like that to me. So if we both start having tears in our eyes, we'll know why. I want to finish with one thing, because I know that you're not going to mention it.
Oh, that's dangerous.
But you were just awarded the Game Changer Award by the Fragrance Foundation in the U.S. And it's a first time.
Yes.
They've given this award. So tell us, I know you're humble, but tell us how this
feels. I'm humble
feels.
for a reason. It's so thoughtful of you to bring it up. I'm humble for a reason. I was awarded the Game Changer the first time. The idea is the Fragrance Foundation says, for your 40 years, you've changed the game of perfume. I wish I could accept credit for it. Yes, I had an idea 40 years ago that it would be easier to sell fragrances if only we could find the family that somebody particularly liked. And yes, I created a guide to be able to do it. But there's a huge difference between coming up with the idea and actually pulling it off. I have to thank so many people along the way who helped me. The evaluators whom I met with at the various brands and the oil houses. I don't recall anybody saying to me, no, I'm not willing to meet with you. No, I'm not willing to share my new fragrances with you. I was at the start of Niche Fragrances. I think I've came to my first long before Accent started. Here, I used to go from the early 80s to tax-free show. And so I'd meet the brands there and sometimes the perfumers. Then when Fragrance started and the origins of Accents, I would go there. None of the brands refused to meet with me, and so I was really at the start of niche perfumery. So many people have encouraged me, put up with me, bugging them for answers to stuff. To be blunt, I'll accept the award, but the award is theirs just as much. They deserve it just as much as I do. And so at the award, I called them my unsung heroes, and I thanked them for that. At the same time, I also thanked my wife, for we've been married now for 54 years, and I can't imagine what she's had to put up with, but she's encouraged me down the track. And my team, Margaret Curry, Clayton, who's with me today, that I think you'll meet, Daru, who I think is, I'm not sure if she's in the room at the moment, and others. Without them, a bright idea would not have been possible. So to all of you, thank you.
Well, thank you, Michael, for all that you've contributed to the world of fragrance.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course.
To a little man sitting over there, right from the start, you picked me up, Silvio, and said, go for it. Thank you.
Oh.
There was a memory of Guy Robet, and we both of us know Guy for a long time. And I have a little anecdote for you. When I created my first fragrances, I sent to Guy and asked him, what do you think? He wrote me, bravo. Then I made my mistake and asked him, what is the best? He simply told me, trust in you, don't ask. And so that was a wonderful teaching I get from Guy. On the 28th of May was an anniversary of the death of Guy. And so thank you so much to remind to all of them the contribution Guy give to this wonderful word. Thank you.
Thank you. To all of you, thank you for bringing back memories. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for letting me be so open and honest with you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Sure. I think we're a little over time, but if there maybe are one or two questions from the audience, we can maybe take one or two.
Oh, great. I'm glad we have time.
Well, we're going to make time if there's anyone who has a question.
Yes, sir.
Oh, let's see. We'll have a mic
Yes, sir.
coming around.
First of all, thank you for this very inspirational conversation. It was really an honor to listen. My question would be, I see the fragrance reel a lot used in when talking to customers, for example, giving them a quick, easy understanding of how to categorize things. But I also wondered, have you intended it for this use primarily, or are there other models that are maybe used for the creative side? Because I imagine that it would be very hard to create a model that would maybe focus on raw materials in the creative aspect of making formulas because of overlapping tendencies. Let's say, for example, how animalic can be found in floral or other aspects of the fragrance reel.
Lovely question. Thank you. When I created the first guide in '84, I presented it firstly to Chanel, was the first company, then to Saint Laurent, not in a slide presentation, but in a mini workshop. And I presented to their marketing people as an idea for retail. And I chose 14 fragrances, one to represent each of the 14 families. And I showed them a signature fragrance from each one so that emotionally they could understand what I'm talking about. Because otherwise everybody's got their own idea as to what this is, what that is. But if you force people to evaluate 14 different families, they quickly get the idea. It wasn't until about later that year that I started presenting this in an extended workshop to consultants and to marketing managers. Over the next 12 years, I expanded that and ended up, we checked not too long ago with Clayton, I think, we figured I'd presented it to close to over 50,000 people around the world, Remember that in 1988, Nordstrom, for example, latched onto the guidebook and said, this is our Bible, and so I had the opportunity to go into the States as well. Likewise, Asia was close to Australia, because I live between Paris and Sydney, for those of you who don't know that, and have done for most of the last 30 years. It was then that I developed the wheel, because I was finding that people were too stuck with each definition of a family. It was like, these are the aldehydes, these are the sheep, never shall the two meet. But the reality is that one family merges into another. But there was no guidebook that had been created either by Harman and Reimer with their genealogy, by Firmenich, or by the French Society of Perfumers who were starting. Every classification was linear. And that didn't make sense to me. Because at retail, I had found that somebody, for example, who likes a floral aldehyde, what I call a soft floral, if I asked for other fragrances that they might have tried, I noticed that more often than not, they would have tried a soft oriental, a semi-oriental. And equally, they would try a floral. And those are the families on either side of the floral aldehydic or soft floral version. Likewise, somebody, for example, who had tried an ambery note, such as a Shalimar, when I asked them for more fragrances, I noticed that they picked up woody amber notes and soft amber notes. And so out of this came this perception that fragrance is a moving field. And I wanted people to have the feeling that the wheel is not cemented, that just because I identify the individual families, it doesn't mean to say that you can't move to another one. In fact, we've created digital versions for retailers in which we suggest to them, tell us your fragrances you like, we'll identify the family that we think is your favorite one, and we'll recommend fragrances from families that are close to it either side, fragrances that maybe you've never tried before. So we use that particular one. So there are many ways that I would like you to use my wheel. Think of it merely as being the definition of what we see fragrance to be. I added the water notes when they came out in the 1990s. As I've explained to you, I added woody amber simply because the perfumers and the brands couldn't agree on what was this one a sheep or was this an amber. And now the industry has accepted that. Should I have added a gourmand family? If you choose to add it, I'm only too happy. I tended to think that the gourmand notes, because I was working with Quest at the time when they were developing Angel in the late 80s and early 90s. And I tended to think that its impact would really be as an accent note throughout all the families. But you may feel that it's a family on its own, and I'm not going to argue with you. Likewise, another question, should we put musk as a separate note with the whole definition of the new musk that are coming through? So I hope that you'll regard my work as a starting point, just an attempt by somebody to try to make more sense out of perfume. Feel free, all of you, to use my fragrance wheel. It's yours. I would only ask that you put in copyright Michael Edwards. That's all I ask. If you go onto the line, you'll find the last time we checked, there was over 500,000 interpretations of the fragrance wheel. And some of them are very funny, but don't giggle, they're pretty horrifying anyhow. And if you really want to keep me close, we can offer you fragrance wheel socks. Yes, I found that in Vietnam. We can offer you cups, we can offer you little things to put into books, page turners there, and a few other things. Don't ask me who's selling them. When I ordered one, I didn't get it. So take your pick. I hope that answers that question.
Okay.
Thank you. So,
Well, I think we're over time. But thank you, everyone. And please follow Michael Edwards' Fragrances of the World online and check out the app. And thank you again. Enjoy the show.
Thank you to all of you.
I know there's a lot of people that want to interview